Okay, so next up we have Ted Smith, who's a longtime British Columbia activist. He's been teaching a non-credited course at the University of Victoria for, I think, probably close to 20 years. I don't know, maybe not quite that long, but a long time. Hempology 101. And he's also the publisher of Cannabis Digest, a local newspaper that details what's going on with cannabis in BC and Canada. And he's recently come out with this book, Hempology 101, The History and Uses of Cannabis Sativa, which is the textbook for his course by the same name. So him and his partner Gail are here, and they have the Cannabis Buyers Club in Victoria, a medical club there as well, and have been doing that for years and pioneering that and dealing with the local municipality in a whole new way of interfacing. So welcome, Ted Smith.
Very much, Chris. It's very much an honor to be here, I must say. And if Michael before me felt that he was talking in front of people far more qualified than himself to be here, I would share that Michael was getting his PhD when I was born. And so if he's a junior to some of the people here, then I'm even more so. And I'm going to challenge even myself a bit today by doing a presentation on the history of cannabis that I've never done before, and it's quite speculative as well, and interconnecting science, which I'm not a scientist at all. I have an economics and philosophy degree, and history. And so, who are we? Why are we here? These are fundamental questions that everyone, whether they're a cannabis consumer or not, faces in their lives. But I would suggest that cannabis is the key to opening the knowledge to who we are as humanity, why we are here, in part how we got here, and how we can progress further. And the history of cannabis and cannabinoids goes back in some ways into the kind of the fundamental, what you might call the rhythm of life. And again, what is life? Well, life is a balance. It's a balance of energy. And not just our life, but back into the very beginning of life, the first atoms were balancing fine particles in this magical dance that started to create form. And as these forms became more complex, these life forms began to balance more and more different forms of energy and types of chemicals that became more complex as these life forms grew and evolved. And as we grew and became more and more complex, at a certain point, about 650 million years ago, life created what we know of as THC, but what then was what we call now anandamide. Now, anandamide, or the precursor of THC, it first appeared in sea squirts. I'm really sorry I didn't have a slide, but I'm sure you can imagine these things with me. If you're familiar with a sea squirt, it's this plant that lives on the ocean floor, and they have these sort of mouths that will float around in the ocean. And when something enters into the mouth, it will actually close around it and take it in. Well, these sea squirts are able to do that because they use anandamide in their nervous system, because they were developing nerves. And so in order to have cells, nerves communicate, they developed anandamide. And so the way that it works in our nerves as well, and in all nerves that on the planet, not just in us, but all vertebrae and different animals, but I guess insects don't have these, right? So not all life, obviously. There's a lot of life that don't have cannabinoids, or endocannabinoids is when they're produced internally, they're called. Exocannabinoids are externally produced. So these endocannabinoids are produced when one nerve sends a signal, let's say pain, that's a really good example. So one nerve is in pain, and nerves don't touch. They're quite funky in the way that they look, and they touch more than one nerve and other parts of your body as well. But nerves don't touch. They come very close to each other, but there's a little bit of space where there's liquid between them. And so the first nerve that's in pain sends sort of like a calcium through this liquid to the second nerve. So the second nerve receives this calcium, and it shoots out anandamide to tell the first nerve, essentially, calm down. We got your message. We're passing it on. But, it's this feedback loop, this balance, this attempt at homeostasis, as it's called, where, the second nerve tries to, swing back into homeostasis. There's this yin and yang of life. And as I said, we're very much this complex balance of forces, right? Our breathing, right? We need oxygen, but we don't breathe on the same length of time. We're taking the exact same amount of oxygen every time. It depends on how excited we are, how our heart rate's going up, or different factors will influence our breathing. But it's very important that that rhythm continues, just like our blood and our heart pumping. It's like our temperature. Our temperature isn't exactly the same at all times. It's 98 degrees, but it's honestly going up a little bit, or it's going down a little bit. And you actually release endocannabinoids if your temperature is going up, and your body is attempting to bring your temperature down because it's healthier for you to do that. And again, if your temperature goes too low, you release a different endocannabinoid that tries to bring your temperature back up. And the exocannabinoids present in cannabis tend to bring your temperature down more. It's actually healthier to have a lower body temperature for different reasons, much like a car, an engine. If your brain heats up or your internal organs heats up, it makes them burn out faster. So it's interesting that cannabis is helpful in that sense, but it also technically makes people more cool. So it's something that is very interesting in how it works that way. But so your body produces this anandamide, and the second nerve, that is, and it sends that to the first nerve to say, chill out, calm down. So the first nerve has got this receptor, and I refer to it as like a baseball glove. Because if you get a brand new baseball glove, the first thing you want to do is take the size of ball that you're using, get the glove really wet, and stick the glove over it, and wrap it up so that it will stay that way and form, and take it out a day later, and then that leather glove will be formed tight to that. Well, that's the way that receptors throughout your body work, is they're designed to fit with a very specific chemical. And sometimes, they can find pharmaceuticals that will fit in there and stop those receptors from receiving anything. Or sometimes they can find pharmaceuticals that will fit into there and behave similar to the ones that your body produces. But the plant produces, again, THC, which is so similar to the anandamide that we produce, that it fits into that receptor, just like a ball into a glove. And it tells that first nerve, chill out. So if for whatever reason your body can't produce enough endocannabinoids or anandamide to tell that first nerve to slow down or calm down, or whatever the message needs to be, well, the cannabis plant sort of complements what your body is trying to do. And that's why it's so good for nervous conditions, which really is such a wide range of issues that, from multiple sclerosis to, well, I'm going to try not to talk about the medical applications of cannabis here, because I could do a full half hour on that. So 650 million years ago, this plant developed endocannabinoids. That is our ancestors. And that plant, those sea squirts, they developed in two directions. Some of those sea squirts evolved into the cannabis plant. Actually, I should say three, because some of those sea squirts didn't evolve at all. They're still there now. They still have the same nervous system using endocannabinoids like they did 650 million years ago. But I believe that we also evolved from these C-squares into who and what we are today, as we, sort of learned, consciously or not, to develop more chemicals internally, like this ongoing experiment in chemical development that allowed our bodies to grow and form new organs, new ways of interacting with our environment, new ways of taking in food and energy that would allow us to more efficiently explore and reproduce and engage with the world. And we've been on this experimentation again for 650 million years in some conscious sense towards where we are today. But again, there's this separation, millions of years ago where the plant went one direction and we went the other. And we weren't consuming the plant, I don't believe, from the moment that division occurred. And so I'm going to speed up a little bit to 5 million years ago or so, and to where we were very much like we are today, more evolved in some sense than some of the primates that exist today. But there was a time where our brains literally exploded, and if you read or watch Terence McKenna, he will talk of this time period where we basically like climbed down from the trees into the plains of Africa when the rainforest started to disappear a little bit and we started to have grasslands. And his explanation for this rapid development in our brains is that we found mushrooms on the ground. And it's something that in some ways it's hard for me to say no to. And I prescribed to this theory for quite a long time because I've had my own mushroom experience that's really woke me up, and I understand the potential of it, to be sure. But mushrooms didn't appear 5 million years ago on the plains. Magic mushrooms and other psychedelic plants and mushrooms have been all over the planet for a very, very long time and continue to be, all over, and we aren't the only species that will consume them. And so I'm not convinced that it was access to the mushrooms that really enhanced our development very quickly back then. I'm convinced that what became accessible to us was large fields of cannabis, which wouldn't have been able to grow in a rainforest, but would have been able to grow and grow very well and dominate, the landscape in some cases in the plains. So I would put it to you that what happened was we climbed down from the trees one day and got into a field of mature hemp that was full of seed. And two things happened from that. One is they ate a lot of hemp seed, which couldn't be healthier for them in so many different ways. And Amanda and I, sorry, I'm not a scientist, but and the endocannabinoids that we produce, and there are many of them, there's hundreds of them, I understand, that they're still beginning to discover that are so similar to THC and the other cannabinoids, and there are about 70 or so cannabinoids we've discovered, that these cannabinoids work just wonderfully in all these various receptors and all these different organs in our body, and essentially like every system that we have to manage homeostasis in our body uses these endocannabinoids. And so these endocannabinoids are all built using essential fatty acids, and omega-3 in particular. And so if you've studied hemp seed and the value of hemp seed, the omega acids that are contained in it, the essential fatty acids, are perfect for human consumption. You couldn't have designed a better food in a laboratory for people to consume in order to maintain their health on almost every level. And so part of that is enhancing or maintaining the production of endocannabinoids. And so eating the hemp seed I think would have been an abundant source of protein and energy, and they would have found, if you've ever been in a field, we had the great pleasure of going to a hemp farm in Saskatchewan this year, and it's just amazing because it's almost like a jungle that you walk into. Because it outgrows all the other plants, so there's a few other plants kind of sprinkled around. But we went, it was a few weeks before it was mature, and I would go up to the plants and peel it back and pick out there'd be like one mature hemp seed that would seem to mature before all the other ones. And they're so tasty when you pick them off, right off the plant and pop them into your mouth, that I actually just stood there while everybody was talking and just going around to the plants, just trying to pick off all the seeds that I could while we were chatting in the field, because it was just delicious. And so it's very easy for me to conceive how, you know, ancient peoples that would have been looking at, you know, all the potential food sources around, that they would have stumbled across this, and they would have found, you know, this very big field of hemp and would have just been picking through the seeds. The second thing that happened is they would have made hash. The first time humans made a drug, they made hash, if hash is indeed a drug. And if you've ever been playing in hemp plants again, it's just incredible. The smell is just like cannabis. You feel like you're walking into a pot field. It smells like it, it looks like it. You know, the only difference is we've kind of genetically altered it to have so little THC that you'd never want to smoke it. And we actually made hemp juice when we were out in Saskatchewan there. We squeezed a bunch of the plants, and just like a wheatgrass juicer. We had Dr. Hornby, a local chemist, test it, and it had about 5% CBD and only 0.63% THC. Now, part of the reason is the THC is being bred out by Health Canada. The farmers cannot even grow their own seed. They have to buy seed from the government every year, and it gets tested throughout the year in the field. And if it tests too high, over 0.5% THC, the government makes them cut it all down, no compensation, except maybe the seed company will give them new seeds next year. But it's something that, you know, the percentages that we got, I think, are disproportionate. I think, you know, it would be interesting to see what cannabis would produce in the wild. I didn't mention CBD yet, but it's also a very important cannabinoid. And so, how much time do I have? Sorry. Okay. Oh, 10 minutes? Yeah, so they would have made hash. Now that would have been good for any number of medical applications immediately. One of the benefits of THC acid, which, if you don't know, the plant itself contains acid forms of the cannabinoids. So THC acid is in the raw plant. So if you just eat a bud, you don't really get high from it. But there's a lot of medical benefits, including being anti-inflammatory, antibiotic, antiseptic, antioxidant, anti-carcinogenic, antifungal, muscle relaxant, and somewhat of a painkiller, but not very much. So you don't really feel it very much. But it's got a lot of great medical benefits. And those medical benefits occur whether you smoke it, eat it, or apply it on the skin. And the method of ingestion and how it's prepared determines how long it stays in your body. Actually, smoking it's in some sense not as effective as eating it or applying it on your skin, because the burning of it decarboxylizes it into THC, and THC has got a lot of great impacts, but it doesn't last very long because you burnt it. If you decarboxylize your cannabis and then put it into olive oil or a food, or even just apply it on your skin, the benefits can last a lot longer than they will if they're smoked. And so again, 5 million years ago, they would have made these like little balls of hash, and it would have got on their skin. One of the first things they would have noticed is how good it was for their skin. One of the more dangerous things for ancient people was skin infections, because if your skin was broken and infected, you could die from that. So it wasn't just something that you know could just hurt you. You got a Band-Aid for it, you know. So you did everything you could not to get infections. So they would have been picking up the seeds. They would have been like, wow, this is really good for my hands. And then they would have started to eat it. Now it wasn't decarboxylized, but it would have been very, very healthy for them. And so they would have learned to use the plant in other ways. I could get into hemp. I promised Chris to stay a little bit out of it, but the earliest weaving, I believe, would have been taking the stalks and making rugs for the floor, because the plant and the cannabinoids, again, they're antifungal. They sort of scare away insects, so it would have been actually really good to use as mats, and that would have been the beginning of weaving. But cannabis also, and this is why it became known over the millions of years that it was used as soma and the tree of life, because the medicinal qualities of it would have dramatically improved when we began to smoke it, and when we began to take these little balls of hashish that eventually became the largest traded commodity at times throughout the ancient world. These little sort of what are now seen as Nepalese hash balls, they would have been thrown onto blocks or heated in some ways that would have had them burning sort of like a charcoal barbecue. And that was the precursor to what the ancient civilizations would have been using in their altars and religious ceremonies. But we would have learned to do that soon after we got fire. So I'm going to skip a little bit ahead to about 1 million years ago, which is when we really got a hold of fire. And so it would have been soon after learning to manage and control fire and heat things that we would have thrown some of this hash on a rock. And that was when, essentially, like the story of Moses goes, we saw God in the cloud. And because the THC and its instant effect on us would have made us feel a lot better, it would have both calmed our nerves, but it also made us think better. It made us think more creatively in a way that we could never think before. Most animals think very linear, in a very linear way. Well, we don't. Well, cannabis helped us with that. And I had an expert witness, Dr. Geiwitz, testify for me in a case about how cannabis helps in nonlinear thinking. And they've done studies using word associations, where they'll give you a word or a phrase, and you've got to come up with similar words and phrases. Well, people that use cannabis or smoke a bit of herb, statistically, hands down, come up with more words, or when you're stoned, you're able to come up with more words and phrases, which is why musicians prefer to smoke cannabis. A lot of writers and creative thinkers, even scientists and engineers and architects like to smoke herb because it helps them kind of get out of the box and think a little bit and be able to come up with new things. Cannabis also has an interesting effect on your memory, in that studies have shown that the use of cannabinoids helps people forget bad memories and remember or forget irrelevant things and remember the important things. And so back in prehistoric days, when we were scavenging for food or learning how to hunt for animals, forgetting the bad and forgetting things that you don't know and being able to focus on those that you can remember and deal with in a creative way, that would be more important. And so cannabis would have been critical to the survival of clans and tribes through the millions of years, up to the point where we had civilizations and religious ceremonies and stuff that we're also learning about today. And that is why I believe cannabis was so instrumental in the development of civilizations in the first place, because the more cannabis that you could grow, the healthier your community was, and the more it had to trade to other communities that weren't able to farm as well. And so, farming and the use of cannabis as a medicine was critical in our evolutionary development, our economic development, our social, religious, and just evolutionary development in general. So I've probably used up all my time there. Thank you for bearing with my speculations. None of that's in my book, if you buy my book.
Next. Okay, next we've got Mark Kloeze, who's just returned from a trip to China. This conference we put on because we wanted to get for interviews for a film we're making by the same name, Cannabis Roots: History of Medical Marijuana. And Mark was in China taking a look at a fascinating new archaeological discovery involving cannabis. And so here's Mark Kloeze.